Okay, from your health, let's go to your wealth. And does the economic slowdown caused by the coronavirus pandemic provide a buying opportunity for property investors? But what about the challenges currently posed for landlords? For that and more, I'm joined by Investment Director at Wealthi, Stephanie Davies. Stephanie, thank you very much for joining me.
Hi, Ricardo. Nice to see you this morning.
Hey, let's start with those looking at buying investment properties right now. What would you say to them? Because I guess capital growth isn't going to be as strong as what history may have seen it more recently.
Yeah, great question, Ricardo. Well, we're seeing lots of opportunities in the market Australia-wide where clients are looking for property. But I think COVID has been a really good wake-up call for a lot of people to review their budgets, also review their property portfolios and see exactly what they're doing and have a good, long, hard think about it, and also sort of stress test it, really. Any investments they may have had, they may have been asked for a rent reduction or been looking at liquidating that. It just depends on what their strategy is.
We'll talk about some of those things in a few moments. Where do you see prices going for investment properties?
Look, prices is an interesting one because there's lots of different factors that will affect pricing nationally. One thing that we're seeing is that media originally anticipated drops of 10 and 20%. And then it was really interesting when CoreLogic came out last month and said that national dwelling prices have only actually moved 0.8%. So what is actually happening in the market we found to be quite different and quite contrasting to what's going on in the media and what we're being told. But I think, look, at the end of the day, interest rates are really low. Everyone needs a place to live. And so there'll be various attributes that come out throughout this time that will protect house values nationally.
So, Stephanie, what are the advantages of buying right now if someone decides to do so?
Look, buying right now is going to be different for every single person. So whenever we have a client, there's a lot that we have to take into account before we'll say it might be a good idea for you or it might be better for you to hold off and wait. There's a lot of government incentives out there that can be very advantageous to first home buyers and people getting into the market. The home loan deposit scheme is incredible. There's lots of stimulus going into the market that will really get people ahead at this time, provided that they do have a look at their budgets and know exactly what they can afford and stick within their parameters. So we're seeing lots of opportunities around residual stock, newly completed properties, and potential discounts depending on the circumstances, developers' cash flow. There's lots of factors that will affect it, and it's not necessarily the value of a property being lower. Sometimes it's a matter of a developer needing to move on to another project, or they've already committed the profits of a project elsewhere, so they'll be willing to take a little bit less for a property to get that cash back on their balance sheet.
And I guess ultimately when we talk about investment properties right now, the fundamental thing is that it's a long-term strategy, isn't it?
Always. So typically speaking, we always want to say that an investment is for 7 to 10 years. Every now and again, there'll be different factors that come out, and you might want to pull out of a property earlier or hold on to it for longer. But that 7 to 10 year mark is always the safest bet.
Okay, Stephanie, let's talk about landlords now, right? Should they feel worried about their investment in today's economic environment?
Look, I think that is going to always relate back to the fact that a property is a long-term move. It's not something that you can just have a quick win on and put in your cash and pull it out just as quick. It's not shares, but you can leverage a lot on it. So landlords are being rewarded at the moment with very low interest rates. And I think a lot of landlords have found that they can actually afford to hold on to their property rather than those fire sales. We're not seeing those fire sales or panic sales that we thought we might have seen earlier on in the market. But if landlords have bought right to start with, they would have been focusing on data and buying in high growth areas that were supported by other factors, not just a nice looking property. And all those other factors will help protect it in the long run.
Can we talk about rents? And I think we've had a recent report and study by the guys at Domain. These are just rent prices for houses. They were released earlier this week, and it shows that nationally rent prices for the quarter were down 1.2%. In Melbourne and Brisbane, down by more than 2%. So, Stephanie, how would you say landlords should navigate this weaker rental environment especially if a tenant asks for a rent reduction?
Yeah, this has been a really interesting topic, and I think I've gone out on a whim and said something that has started a few conversations in the industry. I said earlier throughout COVID that a tenant asking for a rent reduction is a really good opportunity to build rapport with both your tenant and your landlord. The reality is that not every landlord can afford to have their rent halved. But if landlords are fair and reasonable and are willing to have the conversation, then they'll be rewarded with that rapport with both their tenant and property manager. And I think there's some really good strategies around navigating these rent reductions, like meeting the tenant halfway. You might not be able to half your rent, but you can say, look, I understand what you're going through. Make sure you get all the evidence, because a lot of tenants have been pushing the boundaries and asking for reductions when they haven't actually lost their job. So make sure your property manager is getting all the evidence, dotting their I's and crossing their T's, and then also be willing to negotiate and come to the party, but also don't be afraid to ask for something in return. So one of my tenants that asked for a reduction, I said, look, I'm happy to reduce the rent, but will you sign on for a longer lease? So there's other ways that you can negotiate to ensure that both sides are protected and you both feel like you've gotten somewhere.
Two final questions. You mentioned building those relationships, right? With the property manager, what's their role in all of this? And how do you build that relationship with your property manager?
I think a property manager is a really important role in any investment portfolio, and I like to call them asset managers. So you think of them as if they're managing the cash flow on that particular asset. So with that relationship, I think it's important to be really clear and communicate with them from the outset that you had expectations of this property earning X and you want to be empathetic to the tenant, but you also want to make sure that it's in line with what's happening in the market. So I always ask my property managers, what do you think I should do? What is your advice? What else are other landlords doing in the immediate area? And what do you think is reasonable? And then I normally try and find a nice middle ground so that you're really, you're paying for advice, and don't forget to ask for it.
Stephanie, final question. If you as a landlord, you're struggling and you can't afford to repay your mortgage, what can you do?
Well, the banks have just extended their mortgage deferrals for another 6 months till January next year. So that's really good news. So I would be talking to your bank in the first instance, re-looking at your cash flows and your budget, because I know that everyone, when they re-look at their numbers, they can always find little areas in their week or monthly budget and their spending that they can pull back on. So try and find some extra cash amongst what you're doing, and then go to the bank and ask them for help. And again, it's all about communication. Just communicate your situation, try and be fair and reasonable, and you'll always be looked after.
Hey, Stephanie, some great tips there. Thank you so much for your time. I do appreciate it.
Pleasure, Ricardo. Really nice to see you.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
There's Stephanie Davies there from Wealthi, and you can find her on Instagram at stephaniedavies.co. And that is it for the program. Don't forget, if you do seek to make any decisions from this stream, contact a licensed financial advisor before making any financial decision to make sure that that decision is right for you. And your health and your wealth is all over social media: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Periscope, and YouTube. An audio version of this show will be posted on Spotify and now on Apple Podcasts later on this evening. Tell your friends about the show, share it, like it if you do like it. I'm Ricardo Goncalves. I will see you next time.